Hello and thank you for attending my PowerPoint presentation on the High Cloud Quintet, Fallen Heroes of the Xianzhou. This will be a lore-focused PowerPoint, unlike the usual gameplay-focused ones that I do. If you want to see the citations and sources to learn more about this yourself, this set of slides will be linked in the description, where the citations are all in the speaker notes where my script also is. The High Cloud Quintet are a group of 5 legendary heroes from the Xianzhou Alliance formed over 700 years ago. These 5 consisted of Jing Yuan, Jingliu, Feng, Baiheng, and Yingxing. The group fell apart after less than just a short century after Baiheng died in a war against Shu in year 7379 star calendar. To put 1 century into perspective, to Jing Yuan and Jingliu, the Xianzhou natives, a century to them is about 10 years to us humans. To Feng, the Vidyadhara, a century to them is about 15 years to us humans. And to Baiheng, the Foxian, a century to them is about 30 years to us humans. So it's not a blink of an eye kind of thing, but it's still somewhat short relative to their respective lifespans. As of the events of the game, the current year is 8100 star calendar. So the group was formed in around 721 to 820 years ago, which is a really long time ago. Starting with Baiheng, Baiheng is a Foxian starship pilot and one of the most elite ones there were. He was really cheerful and upbeat and one of the nameless, though she never had the fortune of boarding the Astral Express. He was also simultaneously comically lucky and comically unlucky at the same time, where she constantly crash-landed every starship, but made it out of every single one alive. She also called out every single bad omen, and had that last power too. Like I briefly mentioned earlier, she died in a war against the Abundance Emanator Shu. Also, she has absolutely no connection to Bailu, it's not even the same Bai. Like, if you look at the characters that you see on the screen, Bailu's one has an extra horizontal line on top, which makes them 2 completely different words with completely different meanings. In fact, Bailu's one, the one with the horizontal line, it usually means 100, whereas the Bai from Baiheng, the one without the line, usually means like white. Also, Baiheng is a Foxian while Bailu is a Vidyadhara. It's not even the same species. Also, yes, this is the same image as in the thumbnail. There's literally no other media of Baiheng, so I have to make do. Yingxing was a short-lived species before joining the Quintet. His homeland was destroyed by the Morrison and he somehow landed on the Xianzhou Zhuming. Then he was taken in by the General Huaiyan and was made his apprentice. He had extraordinary talent for making weapons and would go on to become a legendary weaponsmith, forging countless legendary weapons, including those used by the High Cloud Quintet, which are Feng's Cloud Piercer, Jingliu's Shard Sword, Baiheng's Recurve Bow, and Jing Yuan's Devastator Glaive. In the Sedition of Imbibitor Lunae, he gained immortality and was struck with Mara and the hatred for Feng in his next reincarnation. He was then banished from the Xianzhou and joined the Stellaron Hunters under the name Blade. I'll elaborate more on the Sedition of Imbibitor Lunae in its own slides. Feng was the High Elder of the Vidyadhara and was the Imbibitor Lunae at the time. For those who don't know, Imbibitor Lunae is just a title that gets passed on from High Elder to High Elder. It's not the name of one particular High Elder. After the Sedition, he was forced to reincarnate and was imprisoned for about 690-ish years before being exiled from the Xianzhou. He was pursued by Yingxing, now Blade, across the cosmos until he met Himiko. He now goes by the identity of Danheng. Also, I'm gonna go on a tangent here. Jing Yuan mentioned that Ling Sha's master performed some healing arts to restore Danheng's memories of being the High Elder right after he reincarnated, which was 30 years ago. Which means that Danheng is only 30 years old. Translating that to Vidyadhara standards, that means he's effectively like 5, being generous. Like, even if he inherited the High Elder's power, he should still be reincarnated regularly as a baby or a child. As we can see from various child Vidyadhara that we see across the Xianzhou. So how does he have an adult-like body by the time we come around? Anyway, tangent over. As for the Sedition itself, shortly after the Quintet disbanded, Feng wanted to resurrect Baiheng. Remember Shuhu, that emanator of abundance? The one that Baiheng died in a war against? Yeah, so Danheng, with the assistance of Yingxing, tried to use their flesh and the transmutation arcana with the Vidyadhara, whatever that is, to resurrect Baiheng. What happened is that this created a draconic abomination thing, which killed about 1200 Vidyadhara, but about 3000 Vidyadhara went missing since then. This is a way bigger deal than it might initially seem, because Vidyadhara cannot reproduce. Their population is fixed. So these 1200 killed Vidyadhara are dead forever. That is a permanent minus 1200 to the population. Anyway, Jingliu then slayed the abomination. Jingliu was Mara-struck during this fight. For, I believe, unrelated reasons. I'll talk about this on her own slide. As for the consequences, Yingxing became a long-life species, which is the top of the 10 unpardonable sins of the Xianzhou. He also got struck with Mara. It also caused the High Elder's succession to be split between Danfeng's next incarnation, Danheng, and the Vidyadhara that will then reincarnate into Bailu. To be specific, it's implied that Danheng inherited the destructive power, while Bailu inherited the healing prowess. Danfeng was then sentenced to the shackling prison for about 690 years, give or take. Nice, but not really. And was forced to reincarnate, then was exiled from the Luohu for a few more years. As for Yingxing, it's hard to say whether he was considered a criminal at the time. As far as I could find, there aren't really any records of Yingxing being wanted back then. Anya's voice lines mention that Blade has broken every statute in the Xianzhou's legal code, although we don't have the legal code, so we can't check for ourselves. It's also hard to say when these crimes happened, or if any of them were related to the Sedition at all, or if it was just him committing crimes as part of the Stellaron Hunters. It could be completely unrelated, and we don't know yet. Jing Yuan is the only surviving and sane member of the Quintet to this day. Frankly, I'm beyond impressed at how he isn't even Mara-struck yet, which is impressive considering how old he is even by Xianzhou native standards. Remember how I mentioned that the Quintet was formed anywhere between 720 to 820 years ago? Because he was already a Cloud Knight lieutenant before he joined, that means he was probably already a fully grown adult at about, my guess is, 200 to 300-ish years? Which means that he's alive for at least like 1,000 years at this point, and he is still not Mara-struck. But anyway, he was a Cloud Knight lieutenant at the time, and it is technically unknown which ship he was born on, but considering that he is now the general of the Luofu, and that the sword champion of the Luofu recruited in, it is highly likely that he is from the Luofu. He was completely uninvolved in the Sedition, or rather, according to Blade, he chose not to do anything. He became general right before Danfeng's sentence and was the one to sentence him to molten rebirth. This means that he's been ruling for about 690 years to this day, which is absolutely wild, considering that most generals reign for less than a century due to their direct involvement in war, not to mention that not many Xianzhou natives even live past 800. This image you see on screen shows Jing Yuan as the Cloud Knight lieutenant. He was the ringmaster for the war downs back then, just like Yingxing is now. Jingliu was originally from the Xianzhou Changcheng, which was devoured by the living planet Rahu, leaving few survivors. Also, side note, the idea of living planets that actively devour stuff is absolutely terrifying. Anyway, she was also the sword champion of the Luofu as well as Jing Yuan's master. She probably invited him to the Quintet because he was her student, as well as probably a top-tier lieutenant, seeing as how he was chosen to be the ringmaster before that. But that's just speculation. The year after the sedition, she lost her sanity due to her Mara and went on a rampage. She left the Xianzhou and her name was erased from the Luofu's public records. The position of sword champion of the Luofu has been left vacant since then. She's somehow still sane after probably about 2,000 years because the living planet Rahu devoured the Changcheng in year 6300 star calendar, which is 1800 years before the events of the game, which means she's about 2,000 years old. So yeah, there's some fascinating morals and themes hidden within the stories of these 5 that honestly are not smart enough to put into words here. And frankly, I originally wanted to make a video of the Xianzhou Alliance's lore in general, but honestly there was too much that was too fascinating about these 5 and I got myself distracted, and these 5 have massively important roles in the recent and more interesting stories of the Xianzhou. Their impact is really vast. Alright, thanks for watching and I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think about this huge overhaul since the Stellaron Hunters PowerPoint. Any suggestions as well as comments in general would be appreciated. Alright, bye!